legendary class with some very cheat-like skills and powers, but in return, you would go back to level 1 again? So let's begin the story. The best virtual reality game in the entire world is named Satisfy. With over 2 billion unique players throughout the world, a fantasy world so vast and varied in content that it is widely considered to be another world. In this world, many lands still sit unexplored, numbering more than the explored lands. In one such unexplored cave named Northern End Cave, where the deepest area in the entire cave is a location stacked with all sorts of gear and items, waiting patiently until a user would come and discover its wealth. We see a boy named Greed, who is a level 73 warrior and has somehow managed to find this cave. Greed was here to get the Earl of Osher's S-ranked quest item, the legendary craftsman's rare book. Greed thinks that it took way too long to find these items and that any other player would have given up by now. But because of the stupid S-rank quest for Greed, I wasn't able to quit it halfway. Greed thinks that he spent a lot of money on just potions and items to complete this quest, and he thinks that if Earl Osher doesn't give him proper compensation, he won't associate himself with him ever again. Greed tries to appraise the item, but the system says that the Eye of Palace is required to appraise this item. Greed gets shocked to hear this, because this item is very expensive. Greed gets depressed and thinks, just how much more money does he have to spend in this damn game, as he has already taken out too many loans for this game? Greed gets more greedy, and he thinks that he will earn more money next month, so he buys that expensive eye. Now, Greed appraises the item, and the system tells him that he has acquired a legendary item. This book contains the secrets of Pagma, a legendary blacksmith who has transcended human boundaries. Upon using this item, you will become Pagma's descendant. Another notification says that Greed's fame has risen by 500 throughout the continent due to getting his first legendary item. Greed was super shocked and happy to see that he got a usable legendary class item, and he thinks that with this he can get one of the strongest classes available. Greed controls his greed and thinks that this is a S-rank quest item and it wouldn't be wise to abandon the quest. Out of greed, he loses control and thinks that he can just sell this for a clean profit. Greed thinks that because of his student loans and gaming fees, he had to work in manual labor, and gaming was the only thing he was confident in. Since Greed has invested so much time into these games, even his friend abandoned him after a while. Even his own family considered him to be a waste of space. Greed decided to sell this at auction and tried to log out of the game. But to his surprise, the system tells him that you cannot log out of the game at this moment. Another notification tells that the quest Earl Osher's secret request has changed to Earl Osher's anger and the difficulty has been raised to level SS. We see a bunch of NPC guards, and Earl Osher himself appears out of thin air in the cave. Earl Osher blames Greed for abandoning the quest for his own greed and desires. Greed gets a notification that Earl Osher has noticed his selfishness, and now he will kill him to regain the item. Greed gets furious and shouts at Earl Osher that he had to face all of the difficulty alone and Osher didn't even help him, and now he wants the item. Earl Osher didn't hear his excuses and ordered a pigeon-headed human to cut off Greed's head. Greed dodges the attack and thinks that since he is also a level 73 player, he can survive this situation. Greed activates his defense skill, but he still gets attacked and loses his half HP. Greed was shocked because he knew that Osher was a level 300 NPC, but even his guards are also so much higher leveled. Greed thinks that he can't win against these opponents and that he will die in vain. But he suddenly remembers the legendary book and wonders what will happen to it if he dies here. Greed thinks that there is only one thing left for him to do, so he opens the book. Suddenly, Greed gets engulfed in lightning. A system tells you that all of his skills and stats have been reset, and you have become the pagan's descendant. A bunch of skills that are related to blacksmithing are created and given to Greed, and Greed thinks that he has also become a member of the labor class in the game. Greed thinks that he will kill Osher and all of his subordinates after the class change. The system tells us that Greed has obtained the title One Who Became a Legend. We see Greed is now half naked with only some shorts on his body, and the system tells us that he is now at level 1. Suddenly, a blade gets touched by Greed, and a notification says that he has died. Now, at the headquarters of the Satisfy game, we see that the head of the operation team gets a report that there has been a class change. 5 minutes ago. The team head says that this is going to be fun from now on. Now inside the game, we see that Greed gets a notification that 2 levels have been deducted and he is now at level -1. With him for playing so late. In the Satisfy office, we see the main leader asking for the field report about the latest class change. A woman informs the player that his ID name is Greed and that while he was previously a level 73 player, he is currently at level 1. His real name is SHIN Youngwoo. Through a secret quest, he obtained Pagma's rare book, according to the information department. He is your run-of-the-mill unemployed game addict. He has shuttled himself around a city for about a year, and for 3 months he has explored countless areas with monsters of 200+ levels, dying multiple times throughout the process. The woman further says that through their careful examination, they concluded that Greed got this legendary class by a mere coincidence, and he is just a foolish player, but his determination in the game is his main factor. The main developer says that he views persistence as a good trait. The main developer tells the team leader that if they follow the calculation made by the supercomputer Morpheus, the North End Cave and the legendary class discovery date should happen 2 years later. But Greed was able to complete all these quests, which were supposed to be done by a level 350 player all alone. Can we really call all this a mere coincidence? The main developer further said, on the other side, we see that Greed, also known as SHIN Youngwoo in real life, was in a very dazed situation because of what happened to him inside the game. He looks at his salary and thinks he can go for another round of games with this money. He thinks that the book alone could have changed his whole life, but he blew up millions of dollars with a mistake. We see that the main developer of the game has arrived in his Bugatti, where Shin was sitting, and he concludes that there is nothing special about Shin. Shin thinks that he is not good at anything else but that game, so let's just give that game one more shot. The developer hears this and thinks that this kid doesn't know when to stop. SHIN Youngwoo jumps into the capsule, thinking that he should at the very least check out his new class. Now Greed revives in a barren land, which is a random place assigned at his revival. Greed looks around and thinks that it's unfair that they banished him from the Patreon city for a small betrayal. Greed finds a bizarre-looking mountain with holes in it and decides to check it out. The bizarre mountain was in fact the Yatan Temple, which was a temple that worshipped demons. We see the demon worshippers doing a fucking ritual on a pretty woman. Greed thinks that temples are generally level 150 dungeons, and he will die again if they find him. Greed checks his stats and thinks that a mosquito has better stats than mine. But he finds out that there are some pretty nice options with this new class, and he thinks he can also use the enhancement skill to make money. Greed mistakenly tried to equip all the equipment he had, but surprisingly, he was able to equip level 60 items. But the system tells me that there will be a penalty applied to the items whose equipping conditions aren't met. Even after the penalty, Greed is far stronger than any noob out there, and he thanks his legendary class for this and calls himself a blessed man. Greed suddenly realizes that even if he equipped level 60 equipment, he is still in a level 150 dungeon, which means any monster can easily beat his ass. Greed plans to escape from here without anyone noticing, but an unknown man approaches him from behind. Greed gets freaked out and attacks the man impulsively. But the man politely tells him to calm down and introduces himself as the bodyguard of Earlstein. His name is Doran. Doran informs Greed that the girl over there is Earlstein's daughter, Irene, and she was kidnapped when Doran went on a vacation. Doran, who is an NPC in this game, says, "I am glad that I don't have to fight these monsters alone," and suddenly a quest window appears in front of him, telling him to rescue Irene within an hour. Greed gets angry thinking that he got another S-rank quest when he can't complete it. Doran compliments Greed and says that usually people would be in a state of fear here, but you are totally fine, which means that you are very powerful. Greed also wonders why this happened and checks his skills. He has a skill called composure, which lowers the probability of being affected by the status effect. Doran thanks Greed for helping rescue the princess, but Greed says he is not going to accept the quest. Doran was shocked to hear this and asks, "Why are you hesitating? Aren't you a very powerful person?" But Greed says that he is not a powerful person, but he is just being lucky, and Greed further says that I am a level -1, and if I fail this quest, I will become a level -3. Greed mistakenly stumbles upon a rock, which luckily falls on a Yatan follower and kills him on the spot. Then automatically accepted. Doran says, "Since you became the Yatan believer's enemy by killing one of them, we are in the same boat now." Doran further says that this is what destiny has decided for us, so I will clear the way for you to go and save Lady Irene. All of the fanatical believers charge towards Greed and dare to attack. Greed thinks that even though he is wearing all of his equipment, the overall restriction makes him like a level 34 player, so basically he will die even if those Yatan believers breathe on him. Greed started to cry, thinking that he was going to die only moments after he respawned. But we see that Doran is a very powerful soldier, and he was beating all the believers' holy asses in a strange manner. After a while, Doran tells Greed that they won't be able to save Irene if they keep fighting like that, so Greed asks what they should do now. Doran says, "Let's finish these in one go," and he pushes Greed on the ground, and he also jumps with him. Greed thinks that he will die from the fall damage, but luckily, Doran uses the levitate spell and saves him. Now Doran has again started to fight, and Greed thinks that Doran is probably a named NPC because of how easily he is handling so many level 150 frenzies. Guys, a named NPC is an NPC that is a strong, famous, and important character within the game. Greed thinks that he also must do something to help Doran in this grave situation, so he starts to cheer up Doran. But all of the fanatics catch Doran in a soul-binding spell. Greed quickly says, "I take back what I said, in actuality, I have always wanted to become a servant of Yatan." Doran gets serious and says, "I am the strongest shadow that protects the family," and he breaks through the black magic with his sheer fucking will. Suddenly, a hot-looking woman with great milkers arrives there, and she says, "I am lucky that I suddenly got a S-rank quest to guard the temple from a named NPC." Guys, if you want to see Greed's current statistics, here they are. The hot lady who arrived here was a real player, and her ID name is Yura, also known as Blood Witch. She is the world's #1 black magic player and 5th on the unified ranking. She is a global sensation who, with her physical beauty and talented ability, appears frequently on the TV screen. Now Yura asks, "Greed, are you also the one who took a S-rank quest?" Yura further says, "This place was perfect for me to test out my new skill without having any cameras around, and it's all thanks to you. What a player with more than level 80, are you sure you can complete this quest?" Greed thinks that I am even lower leveled, but I have a named NPC with me, so I can still fight against a ranker player. Yura now starts her attack and binds Doran with her black magic. But Doran quickly frees himself from that binding magic. Yura now uses black magic, which suckers out the blood inside Doran's body. But surprisingly, Doran gets angry, uses a ring, and says, "Let me show you the strength of a power that has protected a family for 100 years. Yura was shocked to see that Doran used a level 220 skill called Mesmerize. This skill gives the user unlimited defense against an opponent's attacks for a certain period of time. Greed asks Doran if he is alright, and Doran says he was able to save himself thanks to this ring. Greed gets greasier and asks Doran to give him that ring. Doran says, "We will talk about these later, so let's deal with her first." Yura was getting pushed back and thinks that she would have to use her final resort, but she is also scared of Greed because she has no information about him or how high level he is to have such a powerful NPC as his teammate. Yura now uses the maximum amount of mana she can use and unleashes her most powerful skill, called Black Storm. Doran, who was going to get attacked by that spell, thinks that it's over. Yura gets dizzy because of this skill and thinks that using this skill inside the temple has destroyed almost half of the temple, so the named NPC would surely have been killed. But we see that at the last moment, Greed came in between the attack and the Doran, and everyone, including Greed himself, was shocked to see that he was still alive after that attack. Yura thinks that how can such a strong player exist, who she has never heard of before, and just who is this guy? Greed checks his status and sees that he is still an elf with 1 HP, and he also sees that he has an ability called Life Extension, whose effect is that when HP is low, it makes you invulnerable for 5 seconds. Suddenly Greed gets a push on his shoulder, and we see that Doran has used his shoulder to launch himself into the air to attack Yura. But luckily, Yura defends herself with a shield. Yura thinks that first she needs to take care of Greed before it's too late. Yuran looks around and finds that Greed is nowhere to be seen, and probably he just left without making any move. Now in the real life we see that Green had been logged out from the game because he AHD died, and also he lost 2 levels, so he is level -3 now. Now we see that when Doran jumped using Greed's shoulder, he got 1 damage point, but Greed only had 1 HP left, so he just died on the spot. Greed was very angry because Doran just had his team kill him unknowingly. On the inside of the game, Yura was very angry because she thought that Greed showed her sympathy and yielded his quest for her. On the other hand, Greed was angry as hell at Yura because he thinks that if she hadn't shown up there, he would have probably cleared the S-rank quest by bus riding on NPC Doran. Now Greed goes to the user forum and starts to talk sh*t about Yura, saying I am the greatest loser who uses cheap tricks to humiliate others. Greed's sister comes from behind and asks him, have you finally gone crazy? Her little sister's name is SHIN, and she is in the 10th grade and currently 17 years old. She starts to clean up the room of his older brother and nags him for cleaning his room from time to time. The next day, we see that Greed was alone in his home and thinks that he can watch whatever he wants right now. He turns on the TV and starts watching news about Satisfying. The reporter was surprisingly talking about the same place where Greed was last night. The new reporter further says that they also have the testimony of an eyewitness, and a mushroom-headed boy comes to tell his story. The boy says that yesterday he was forced to flee to the temple while being chased by a monster when he heard a loud sound. What he saw was that Yura was about to use a powerful spell against his big brother. But something really surprising happened that even shocked Yura. She had cast her ultimate spell, but her big brother didn't get a single scratch after getting hit by that spell. The reporter was shocked to hear this news and says that means he is a top ranker, and he would probably be a very famous person, so can you recognize his face? The mushroom-headed boy says he died after getting crushed by a rock while staring at Yura because she is really pretty. Greed realizes that he has become very famous and has everyone's attention on him right now. Greed thinks that he is going to be rich now. He quickly calls the consulting center and says he wants to report something to the global news, and he says that he is the man from the Yatan Temple news. The other person on the phone asks for his username and level, and Greed says that he is currently level 3. The other person on the phone hangs up after hearing this. Greed realizes that even if he reports his current situation, no one will believe what he is saying is true. Now, Greed sees on TV that Doran was successful in saving Lady Irene from the fanatics, but unfortunately, he died in the end. Greed thinks that even though he was an NP, he was a very nice person. Greed further thinks that Doran had a very nice ring, and he should have given him this ring before dying. The next story was about a person who jumped 30 levels in just 3 months. Greed was shocked to hear this because it took him years to reach level 70. The man says that the secret to his fast leveling is his sword, but Greed looks at the sword and thinks that this is just an ordinary sword. But suddenly the man activates his skill and a red flame engulfs the sword, and he tells me that he has a passive skill that modifies any weapon that he has in his hands so that it absorbs the life force proportional to the damage dealt to the opponent, and this way he can level twice as fast. The news reporter says that she's never heard of this skill before, and the man says that he got it just 3 months ago. He has an epic class called Blood Warrior. Guys, for your information, Epic is one class below Legendary. Greed looks at him and thinks that due to using the hidden class, he was able to level up so quickly using just a single skill. Greed now determines to use his new class called Pagma's Descendant prospectively. The next day, Greed respawns in the Byran village. Greed looks around and thinks that this is the place where he got his quest from Ashur, and he concludes that he respawned here because Yatin's religion is hostile towards him, so resurrecting through a temple is impossible. The people around here are shouting for us to party up with players who are above level 100. Gathering parties for users above level 100, the monsters outside the village would also be level 100. Greed thinks that a level 3 would die even if he stepped outside, so he plans to go to a newbie village suitable for his level. He goes to a carriage and asks the driver to take him to the safe village. The driver says Winston Village will be perfect for a newbie, but he says it will cost him 10 gold. Greed checks his inventory and then says, "Excuse me, Mr. Driver," but the driver interrupts and says, "Just get lost. I know you are going to make an excuse like your poor, sick mother is waiting, and that's why you want a discount." Greed goes to a corner and starts to cry, thinking about unfair capitalism. Greed suddenly remembers that he is a descendant of Pagma, so he can just earn money and level up at the same time by crafting items. Greed checks his class skills and sees that his reputation and stats increase with every item he makes. Greed was also surprised to see that he had already reached level 1 on legendary blacksmith's craftsmanship, and as far as he knew, even the first rank blacksmith is only at intermediate level. Greed sees that there is another skill called creation through which he can create his own production method, and since he can use it 3 times, he thinks to try it once. Greed activates the skill and says, "Let's make a great sword," which is useful for hunting and leveling up. The system asks what material you want to use, and Greed remembers the strongest material, called blue orichalcum, and tells the system to use it. The system asks him to design the blueprint with his own hands. Now Greed carelessly makes a greatsword, and as he gets overexcited, he starts mumbling that the attack power should be greater than 10 million and that meteors should fall from the sky with each attack, and it can also ignore an opponent's defense and go for an instant kill. We see that he made a sword that kind of looks like a shark. The system says that the auto-calibration will now begin. Revisions will apply according to the materials used and the blueprint design. The system started to rectify all the errors in it, and as soon as the auto-calibration was completed, suddenly all of the information about that great sword started to sweep inside Greed's brain, and he thinks that this is happening probably because of his blacksmith class. The extra options and the stats of this sword are just out of this world, and seeing all these things, Greed gets extremely excited and thinks that now he just needs to get blue orichalcum from the monster named Guardian of the Forest. But he suddenly sees that there is also a user restriction of level 300 and that you must have strength above 5000 in the advanced sword mastery skill at level 8 or above. Greed thinks that even the first ranker was at level 250, and even if he reaches level 300 and puts all of his stats in his strength, he still won't be able to accumulate 5000 points in it. Greed thinks that he again made some shite due to his overexcitement, but then he suddenly realizes that due to his legendary class, he can wield any weapon with a penalty on it. Now, Greed thinks that he just needs to get blue orichalcum to make the sword, but unfortunately, due to his low-level equipment, no one accepted him on their team. Greed started to bluff that he was a level 100 player, but no one still believed him except a man named Regis. Everyone was shocked to see Regis because he was from the Zadaka Guild, he is first in the martial artist ranking, and even his nickname is Holy Fist. Greed thinks that this handsome jerk is also a ranker, and the world is so unfair. Now, Regis suggests to everyone that to confirm his level, let me spar with him. Greed thinks that he is fucked right now because if Regis really fights him, he will die with just a punch. Greed quickly runs away from there to save his life, and he thinks that he should first collect some money for the carriage fees and then level up a little. Now, suddenly, the system asks to name the newly designed item, and Greed thinks that the greatsword he made is a failure, so he names it Failure. Now, Greed goes to a blacksmithy and asks the blacksmith working there to give him a blueprint for an item that sells very well. The blacksmith looks at Greed and thinks that he is trying to belittle the work of a blacksmith, as he doesn't look at all like a blacksmith, so he taunts him and tells him to get lost from here. Greed started to cry at the wall of blacksmiths, thinking that he didn't have any other way to earn money now. The blacksmith looks at him, pities him, and gives him the task of chopping some firewood. Greed thinks that he can earn a little money and also level up with this quest. But the problem is that even though this is a game, if you do not know the proper process, you might end up failing to chop the firewood. Greed uses his appraisal skill on the axe, and the system tells him that his understanding of the old axe is 100%, so now he has learned how to make an old axe. Greed thinks that he got so much understanding in one try because of his legendary passive skills. Suddenly, there are arrows on the wood log showing where to attack to cut the log. Surprisingly, the wood was perfectly cut in half thanks to the instruction. 2 hours later, we see that Greed is totally exhausted because he has very low stamina due to being level 3. Greed still stands up and starts to chop the wood so that he can complete his quest. Suddenly, a notification says that the persistence statistics have been opened. Greed thinks that this must be a legendary skill, and he suddenly feels his exhaustion disappear, and feels rejuvenated. In the evening, the blacksmith was shocked to see that Greed had chopped down 1,000 pieces of wood in just 6 hours. Greed tells him that he is really a blacksmith, so it was not that hard for him. After hearing this, the blacksmith gets serious and gives him a quest to mine the iron ore, saying, "If you succeed in this, I will believe you." Greed looks at the quest window and thinks that the 55 experience points from completing the quest will surely get him to level 0. We see that Greed was totally exhausted when he reached the mining site, and it was because Greed had to walk for 3 hours just to reach here due to his low movement speed. Greed asks for a mining place from the worker and says he is here to mine iron ore for Mr. Smith. Other mining workers started to laugh at him, saying that how could such a bony dude be selected by the best blacksmith in the town? The miner rudely tells him to go to a corner and imitate them. All of the miners were shocked to see that when Greed started mining, the iron ores started to come out like crazy. Greed mined for the whole evening and collected a total of 170 iron ore before finally reaching level 1. Now the system tells me that all the stats that were reduced to a minimum due to the minus level penalty have been restored to their normal states. The system further indicates that the extra stats of Pagma's descendant have been applied. Greed looks at his stats window and thinks that a normal level 1's total stat point should only be 22, but Pagma's descendant has 165, and if we also add the persistence stat that was created earlier, it becomes 182. Greed suddenly notices that he also has an extra 40 stat points, and then he realizes that he got all these stats because of the negative levels and thinks that this is awesome. We see that due to completing 2 tasks, splendidly Greed's affinity with Mr. Smith has increased by 60, and his reputation within Byran town has increased by 200. Thanks to all these, the blacksmith is acting very gaily towards Greed. Greed now requests that the blacksmith recommend some items that sell well because he needs money for his carriage fee. The blacksmith says that he already prepared something for him, and he shows him the Jaffa arrows and tells Greed that this would be a good item for his first try. The blacksmith further says that this isn't your average arrow, it has a bit of Jaffa mixed with the steel. Its special effect is that it ignores some of the enemy's defenses, hence, it is indispensable for raiding the guardian of the forest. Greed gets happy after hearing such details and appraises the arrow. But his understanding of the Jaffa arrow only got to 89%, so he couldn't make it right away. Greed wonders if he can increase his understanding of it and gain its production method by disassembling it. The blacksmith again acts a little gay and says, "I will teach you about the production method, so follow me." The blacksmith tells us that first we need to smelt the ores by putting them in a furnace at the appropriate temperature to remove the limestone and other impurities inside of them. After cooling the molten iron, we get pig iron that isn't suitable for weapons, so to make it suitable, you need to reduce the carbon content through a process called steelmaking, and this is the end of steelmaking. Finally, we have to add some Jaffa ore and then create the arrow. Greed put on the gloves and said, "Let's try it." As Greed had seen all of the steps shown by the blacksmith very carefully, and he also had arrows instructing him what to do, he was doing the job perfectly. While trying to maintain the temperature, the system says that the Pagma's descendant is sensitive to the temperature and Greed can precisely measure the temperature. Now, Gmail gets a detailed notification window with the temperature on display, which makes things a lot easier. Greed was successful in smelting the iron and completing the quest. The system says that he gained 80 experience points and that his affinity with Smith has increased by 30. The blacksmith gets behind Greed and says, "You are so amazing and sexy." Greed gets scared of this and says, "Don't come near me ever again." The blacksmith tells Greed that he can't simply be talented, it's just like Pagma was reborn. Greed thinks that this blacksmith is really talented in finding out these things, but I am not a reincarnation but a descendant. The blacksmith now moves on to the next step and tells Greed to mix and heat the molten metals together and pour them into the mold. After the arrowhead has been solidified, put it in the arrow's haft. Greed now looks at the finished product, and the system tells him that he has acquired the production method of the Jaffa arrow. The blacksmith tells Greed that he will give materials for free on his first try. Now the blacksmith looks at him working and thinks that he is not an ordinary boy because the way he handles the molten metal is masterful. The blacksmith suddenly realizes that he didn't teach Greed how to make the arrow shafts, so he tells him that he will make them for him while the metal cools down. Greed denies for his help because when his understanding reached 100%, the system gave him the shaft production method too. Now Greed makes some perfect arrow shafts using metal and feathers, thanks to the class compensation and high dexterity stat. The blacksmith was pretty shocked to see that Greed had made them on his first try. Now Greed finally attaches the arrowhead and the arrow shaft. Suddenly, the arrow started to shine, and the system told me that his skill, legendary blacksmith's breath, had been activated. This is a unique skill, and its characteristics are that when you concentrate on making an item, the will of Pagma's descendant will fill the crafter's item. All stats of the crafter's item will increase by 5%. There is a rare chance of giving special features to your crafted item. Now the system says that the item that Greed made is not ordinary but an epic level special Jaffa arrow, and it has an extra feature in which there are certain chances that it will totally ignore the enemy's defense. The system further tells us that an epic item has been produced, so all stats have permanently increased by 4, and he also gained experience, so he is now a level 3. Greed looks at the stats of the arrow and thinks that there are no other arrows with gives him 100 Jaffa arrows and says, "Take them with you." The blacksmith requests that it would be nice if we could stay together a little longer. Greed thinks that due to the weight of the arrows, his movement will slow down, so he must sell them as fast as possible.